You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
From a third of an acre to nearly 3 acres, from 6 CSA members to almost 30, and from doing it all solo to putting up her first high tunnel, Farmer Mac, now Mara McCasted of Ad Astra Farms in Maryland, has been busy. Today, she shares how a 4 Farmers grant helped fuel that growth and what it really takes to farm with heart in a system stacked against small farmers. Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. Today, we're checking in with a familiar voice, Farmer Mac, Mara McCasted of Ad Astra Farms in Maryland. If you've been listening for a while, you'll remember that she joined us early on, back when One Bite is Everything first began. Since then, a lot has changed. A new name, a new farm site, and some big growth, fueled in part by a 4 Farmers grant that she received in 2023. In this episode, Mara shares how she's expanded from a third of an acre to nearly 3 acres, doubled her production beds, grown her CSA membership nearly 5-fold, and put up her first high tunnel. She also opens up about what it means to farm as a Black woman in America, the mental health challenges farmers face, and how community, partnerships, and perseverance keep her moving forward. Joining me for this conversation are 2 4 Farmers interns, Liana Kolenovic and Shahid Islam, who ask thoughtful questions about Mara's journey, the CSA model, and the bigger issues shaping farming today. This is a conversation about growth, resilience, and what it really takes to farm with heart in a system that doesn't always make it easy.
My CSA has continued to be the bread and butter of the business. And from my first season, which I talked to you at the end of, to now, it's increased by almost 5 times, from 6 to almost 30 customers, which I'm still selling fall shares. And so if I sell out those fall shares, it will easily be 30 plus by the end of the season. And that's been a big deal. I think this year we experienced big explosion in folks who want to eat local, who want to eat sustainably grown produce, who want to feel confident in their food supply, and understanding that that is a motivating factor. I have not leaned into the anxiety and fear that people have around eating quality food, or making sure that, being able to get weekly deliveries of produce so that they know what they're going to eat, just because that's not my style. I want people to have joy in what they're doing and in the produce that they're getting. And honestly, joy and love are the things that are going to carry us through all the craziness that's going on in the world today. So CSA continues to be a big deal. I am at the top of my capacity of what I can do. And so this year, I've been leaning a lot more into partnerships with other farmers, other small farmers who use organic methods. A lot of the beginning farmers that I know, self-included, are not yet certified organic or certified naturally grown, but we use organic methods, and that's good enough for me and my customers. And, I make a full disclosure about that for them. And yeah, so I've been leaning more into those partnerships. If somebody's growing something that I don't grow or can't grow, like cucumbers, for example, I can't grow them. I'm allergic. My arms kind of puff up whenever I'm working cucumbers, even if I wear long sleeves. And so, buying in cucumbers and things like that, buying in fennel that I don't grow. So I've been leaning into those things, but I've also been kind of leaning into add-ons for some of my customers. So this year I'm partnering with a farmer and a beekeeper for eggs and for honey. So my customers are able to get local honey, get local eggs. Kind of cool being able to crack an egg that was laid yesterday or that morning. And so that's been pretty awesome, and people have leaned into that. Another thing, I am still doing markets. Markets are still about the same, but this year I'm piloting a shared market booth with two other beginning farmers. These are farmers who finished the beginning farmers training program with me at EcoCity in 2023. We share a market booth, we have a cooperative agreement, and we shared the application, we share the insurance, we share the fees, and we take turns being at the market. And so that's given all of us a little bit of flexibility. Our flower farmer has never sold at a market before, and so it's kind of training wheels for them so that he feels more confident in being at market, setting up at market, and has company while you're at market, because it can be lonely sometimes unless you're friendly with the other vendors. And then for myself and the herbalists who are experienced market farmers, it gives us a little bit of flexibility to do other things. Maybe I drive deliveries, but I can send my produce with my partners, or they can send their products with me and they can do other things. And so it's working out pretty well so far. We've been doing it for a couple months and it's going really well.
I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about the CSA, especially for Shahid and Liana, just in terms of, what a CSA is, but also why it's so powerful for a farmer.
Absolutely. So CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. It's a direct purchase model that was pioneered by Dr. Booker T. Watley from Tuskegee University in the 1960s. He started it as a way to help Black farmers increase their revenues on their land and to kind of maximize the land, but also to get the community to support that farm and to share in the risks and the rewards of farming with that farmer. Because having a farmer in your community that you have a direct relationship with, it is an important way to secure your food supply. It is an important link in food sovereignty. And you just move different when you know where your food is coming from, when you don't have to worry about what you're going to eat. Let me put it that way. So CSA is powerful for me as a small farmer because, like I said, there are all these families. And for the most part, that is who my members are. It sounds like 30 people. No, this is 30 families that are entrusting me to bring them fresh produce on a weekly basis during my growing season. And they are bought in to the success of the farm. If I had a catastrophic farm failure and lost every crop that I had, well, they're losing those crops with me, but they're also bought into, the bumper crops and the success of the farm. So they have the first right to any excess produce that I grow. I coach them on how to use the produce that they're getting. And so for some of them, it's about a healthy eating journey and they don't know what to do with all the produce that they get. So, I kind of talk them through some things like, yes, this is a fennel bulb. Here's good ways to eat it. And by the way, there's a recipe for, fennel and orange salad in the cookbook that I gave you when you joined the CSA. So I have a lot of conversations with them. Like I said, it's a big deal to me to be trusted to feed their families, but it also continues to be the bulk of my revenue. 2/3 of my revenue comes from CSA at this time. I imagine as I grow, that might shift a little because it is a challenging way to grow. You have to offer folks a lot of variety and you got to be able to run several things in out of the fields every week to be able to deliver to your customers. And so I do imagine I might hit a natural limit at some point in terms of how big the CSA can get. And then I might have to lean into wholesale or more direct marketing like a farmer's market. But for now, it is the bulk of what I do.
So you mentioned that there was a palpable shift in terms of customers feeling like they want to get closer to their farmers and get closer to Whole Foods and the kind of things that you're selling. And I'm wondering if, from an anecdotal perspective, you're hearing like why that shift is happening. I'm always thinking about, especially with the For Farmers movement, thinking about people who don't support farmers now and farmers and what's in that gap to try to help to close the gap. I'm just curious what you're hearing.
So I think that there has been growing distrust in my community over just the quality of food that you purchase in the grocery store. For Shahid and Liana's benefit, I live in the second richest majority Black county in the country, and I also service the richest majority Black county in the country, which is the neighboring county to us. So these are Charles and Prince George's counties in Maryland. And each county has over 20 food deserts. So places where, first of all, you can't even reach a grocery store, or you have to travel farther than most people have to travel on a normal basis to reach a grocery store and to be able to buy fresh food. But then on top of that, when you get to the grocery store, I have heard complaints about the quality of produce. It's not very fresh. It's already starting to spoil by the time it gets to us. We don't know what's been put on it. So I take that as a reference to synthetic pesticides and toxic substances, which we're learning that certain produce, you can't wash it off. It gets absorbed into the skin layer of the produce, and the healthiest way to then eat that produce is to peel it, which you lose a lot of nutrients and fiber that way. And so I think that's always been kind of there. But I think that with a lot of the economic anxiety that people are experiencing in, the world today, people losing their jobs, people losing access to federal benefits, I think that there has been a bigger push to make sure that people know where their food is coming from. And so I think those are the two big things that I'm getting from my customers.
And in terms of the food deserts in your area, obviously many, and a huge disparity between the top and the bottom, what kind of efforts are you seeing, especially now that there have been severe federal cuts to food banks? And tell me what's happening in your area with that.
So I have seen the state of Maryland leaning in a little bit to certain things. The administrators at the agencies that service farmers here, so like Maryland Department of Agriculture, for example, they have been leaning into the farming community, including the Black farming community, to say, hey, if the federal government isn't going to, for example, give us supplemental funds to purchase local produce for our school children, well, we're going to make it happen. And so there have been outreach efforts to us to say, go ahead and get registered in our procurement system so that when the next round of farm to school purchasing happens, you can throw your hat in the ring. So I think that's one thing. I think that a lot of non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, they've been pivoting and looking at ways that they can self-fund and adjust programming to still be able to serve communities. For example, at Eco City Farms, where I am, we had to adjust the beginning farmers training program down by about a month and a half. So unfortunately, the farmers or the trainees are losing about 6 weeks of programming, but they still get to complete the program. They still get their sustainable agriculture certificate. And so I think that that's something. I think that you're also still seeing food pantries run by churches and other organizations sort of leaning into local a little bit more as well, if only to be able to say that we're purchasing fresher produce that's going to last longer for the folks who are picking it up and stimulating the local economy. And so I think that folks are finding ways to do what we can with what we have, even if it's for the moment, even if we can't plan years out. I guess there's one other organization that I do want to shout out, and that's Future Harvest. They are a farmer serving organization that serves the Mid-Atlantic, so Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, DC. They have leaned into providing funding for farmers to grow exclusively for food donation. So I just put a grant in requesting a certain amount of money to be able to give away CSA shares this year. There's also technical assistance too. So organizations like Our Space World are also looking at ways to support farmers through helping them apply for grants so that they can get money to continue to grow. So yeah, we're pivoting, we're making things work. It was a huge shock to the ecosystem here for a lot of organizations to lose funding the way that they have.
Yeah, it's a big concern across the country. Certainly, farmers having been promised grants and having spent against those grants and then having those rescinded. Did that happen to you?
So it was not rescinded, but it was delayed. So I was in the process of getting my EQIP grant for my first high tunnel. And, I signed the contract and had to get my high tunnel up. Wasn't sure if I was going to be reimbursed. And ultimately I was. But I still ended up being out of pocket for like builder's fees and things like that, which is standard for that program. But I had an arrangement with another nonprofit to pay those builder's fees for me so that the high tunnel would have been completely covered, and they lost their funding.
The Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, has become one of the most impactful conservation programs for U.S. farmers, directing more than $1.8 billion annually towards sustainable practices across over 13 million acres of working farmland. Administered by the USDA's NRCS, EQIP provides cost share and technical assistance for projects that improve soil health, reduce erosion, enhance water quality, and strengthen resilience against climate extremes. Farmers can receive up to 75% of the costs covered, and historically, underserved producers, such as beginning, veteran, and socially disadvantaged farmers, qualify for up to 90% support, making it one of the most accessible federal farm programs. For smaller farmers operating on thin margins, EQIP can be transformative, offering both economic relief and a path to more sustainable, competitive farming.
So then I ended up out of pocket for the builder's fees.
How much was that approximately?
So originally it was going to be $3,500, which is a big deal for a small farmer like me. The builder did agree to work with me, and he knocked about $1,500 off of that, but it was still $2,000 that I was not expecting to spend. And I don't know a single farmer in this area that does not have a similar story, big or small.
Now, the EQIP grants, what was the communication like around that? Like, okay, we're on a delay, it's on hold, we'll see, anxiety levels go up, and then ultimately they come through. How did the communication work?
Well, so here in Prince George's County, we've got an awesome team of folks. The folks at NRCS are tight with the folks from PG County Soil Conservation District, who are tight with the folks from PG County Department of Energy and Environment, because they all work in the same building. And so they were talking to us, they were talking to each other, they were getting the word out. They've got listservs. They host workshops in partnership with other organizations like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation here. And so they were at all of those workshops, letting folks know, like, hey, these resource concerns still exist. And as far as we know, the federal government is still in the business of helping farmers resolve resource concerns. It's just going to take a little bit of time to kind of hopefully get things back on track, but hang in there. We know what's going on. It's scary to you guys, but we're communicating with you and they're communicating with us, and we'll figure it out. And I do believe that helped a lot. Like, them being able to reach out to us was a big deal. Now, in neighboring counties, not so much. So I was fortunate in that regard, but
I think you are, because I've heard from across the country that, like, we're out $40,000. We had to take out a loan to actually do the expenditures. We're out $40,000 that we were promised. We have a signed contract, and now there's zero communication, whether the staff weren't authorized to talk or just didn't have anything to say or were eliminated or what have you. So I know it sounds like you were in a fortunate pocket there, which is great. I'm glad for you.
yeah.
I have one more question before I turn it over to the interns to ask whatever is on their mind. But you mentioned earlier there's a lot going on with changes, obviously, to grants for farmers and immigration concerns and all kinds of things. You and I have had some very frank conversations, and I'd love for you to address something that came out of the administration recently about farmers taking ownership for migrant workers. In early July 2025, at a campaign-style event in Iowa, President Trump proposed a policy where farmers could vouch for, essentially take ownership of, long-term migrant laborers under threat of deportation. He stated that if a farmer is willing to support a worker, quote, that's going to be good, and implied that farmers would wield considerable responsibility, and if things went poorly, they'd be the ones penalized, not the workers. Migrant rights groups Labor organizers, legal experts, and farm worker unions warned it entrenches power imbalances, leaving workers vulnerable to exploitation, much like historic guest worker programs that have been likened to, quote, the closest thing to slavery. Online and media responses compared the plan to plantations, rebranded indentured labor, and the coercive systems abolished by the 13th Amendment, raising alarms that it risks dragging U.S. agriculture back into a model of servitude rather than offering real protections. I just think like it was a small piece of language that I think not everybody heard, but the people who heard it in a certain way that's really hurtful. And I just love to hear what your reaction was to that.
So, yes, he did use the word ownership, he being President Trump, used the word ownership. And I think that the reaction from a lot of Black folks and folks that are not Black, but that I know personally, was basically that he's trying to push us back towards some kind of indentured servitude or slavery. And I want to first say that we ain't going back. Nobody's going back. That's not a thing. I shouldn't say that's not a thing. I know that that's the lived reality for a lot of people around the world, but even now. But that is not something that my community is necessarily going to stand for. But I think that it takes these people who have worked hard to feed us in this country, who are human beings with hopes and dreams and families of their own, and it reduces them to cogs in a machine, to something that can be picked up and placed where you want it to be, treated how you want to treat it, and replaced when it ultimately breaks. And I personally despise any language that reduces people to something like that.
A lot of language besides the ownership comment that has really reduced the farm workers, especially immigrant farm workers, whether they're here legally or they're undocumented. I mean, we do have provisions that protect them, whether they're documented or undocumented, as they're working on farms. And I was having this assumption that it was bigger farms. And it is certainly the bigger industrial farms that have a lot of immigrant workers, but they're also, I'm in New York State, so the small farmers here in New York State, if they're bringing in folks to help them with harvest or with planting, it's 3/4 of their workforce. So it's maybe 3 people working on their farm plus themselves. And so it's a lot more widespread among small farmers to have immigrant labor. And we're not necessarily looking to pay them a living wage anyway. So I feel like there are all these conflicts, like we're already not treating them well. Now there's a strike in California.
And you're right, there are small farmers who do lean into the specific visas that are for farm workers. And the way I understand that visa program to work is that they are paid, or at least under one of the previous administrations, they're required to pay them a higher wage, something that's comparable to what they would receive if they were an American citizen and they were working here. Some of those programs are set up that way. And when the funding was cut, paused, whatever you want to call it, I do know some farmers who personally had to delay the start of their seasons because that funding was also cut, and they had paid money to bring workers over on these visas, and their applications were in limbo. I'm not sure the status of those things now, but there are a lot of farmers who do rely on immigrant workers and part-time workers and to be able to do what they do. I think that, the conclusion that I arrived at was, I think the words I used was that there's no better admission that capitalism as it exists today doesn't work than to say that we would rather push people back towards indentured servitude and slavery than to pay them a living wage and to pay them a dignified wage and to treat them like human beings. And I think it just highlights that our system, all the systems in our country, have been failing a lot of us, if not all of us, for a long time. And we really need to look at ways to adjust them so that they are more fair, so that they are more equitable, so that more people can live the lives that they want to live. I don't think that the way this administration is approaching that change is the way, because it ignores human dignity and it ignores human decency. But I can agree with folks on the other side of the issue that something needs to change. And I think that we need to lean into our humanity and come to the table to talk about how that can happen in a way that is dignifying for everyone.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd love for you guys to ask any questions before we let Mara get back to her veggies.
A quick question, Mara. Since being a Black farmer in Maryland, how was that experience for you and to the customers? Because for me, when I read your bio, I was like thinking to myself, like this would be my first time seeing a Black farmer, right? And that would be kind of like a shock. How did you connect to your customers? Like, how was that experience of the customers seeing you?
I think that's a fair question. And I do still run into people, even at market, that are like, oh, wow, I've never met a Black farmer before, or I've never met a Black woman farmer before. So for me, connecting to farming it was challenging in the same sense that it is for a lot of people who are coming to farming. I think that we in America look at farming as unskilled labor, and we tend to ignore all the science and biology and project management and everything else that kind of goes into it. And so for me, I am college educated. I have an MBA. I'm certified as a project management professional and a government financial manager. And so for me in my community, when I decided that I wanted to scale up from being a home gardener and move into farming, even though I was doing it to try to help solve a specific problem, one of the reactions that I got was, well, you don't need to work outside. You don't need to work with your hands. You have advanced degrees, you've got a career. You don't need to do that. And so I think that for me, that kind of pushed me to lean into the farming community a little bit more, to kind of lean into the aspects of my other life that I can bring to the farming table, like my skill as a project manager. And that was a little mini identity crisis that I had to overcome in like my first year. But it has not been unusual for me to meet folks and they're like, well, you're the first Black farmer that I've ever met. The flip side of that is meeting folks in the Black community who are like, I grew up on a farm and I don't know why you would ever want to do that, because it's hard. It's hard work. You know what I mean? But I do think that I am very fortunate to be in a pocket of a lot of small farms, diverse farmers. The Maryland beginning farmer space, so 10 years or less of experience, is a very Black, very female, very queer kind of space. And I'm meeting a lot of folks who come from different backgrounds, but have similar upbringings in other ways. And we're able to kind of lean into each other.
Being a Black farmer in the United States often means navigating a complex landscape shaped by resilience in the face of persistent structural barriers. Today, just 1.4% of farmers identify as Black, down dramatically from the 12 to 14% seen in the 1940s, despite Black individuals comprising over 12% of the U.S. population. By 2022, there were roughly 32,700 Black-operated farms, managed by about 46,700 Black producers, covering some 5.3 million acres, an average farm size of 163 acres. These farms tend to be smaller and generate fewer sales. Only about 2,500 Black farmers reach the $100,000 annual sales threshold, which is considered one of the minimums for a viable farm business, and many operate on revenue barely above $5,000. This is due to the economic barriers Black farmers face, who were often denied access to credit, equipment, and crop insurance, making it harder to scale up or compete with industrial farms. Many younger generations moved to cities seeking steadier work, since farming offered little financial security. Since Black-owned farms tend to be smaller and less profitable, it's harder to sustain operations across generations.
I feel like there was some aspect of your question that I have not answered yet. So what was the last thing that you asked?
How are the experiences of the customers meeting you?
Yeah, I think they think it's cool. You know what I mean? Especially folks with kids. when they come to the market and they meet me and it's like, oh, she's a farmer. She grew that bunch of chard that you're getting ready to eat. She grew that pint of tomatoes and oh, look at these carrots. She grew those. The kids think it's really cool. I give them stickers.
Like a superhero.
Like a superhero. And it's funny because one of my best friends, her youngest son, oh my goodness, I don't know why. He loves me to death. And he had to do a project at school about a career. And he was assigned farmer. And the first thing he thought about was me. And so I was the subject of kindergartner's farm project or career project, and he talked about how I grow vegetables and deliver vegetables to their family and how he's enjoying growing in his garden. And so I do think that for a certain kind of person who feels a connection to the earth and feels land stewardship is cool, I think that it has been a little bit of that kind of celebrity sort of experience on a scale that I can handle because I tend to be very private. And so, yeah, it's been good.
Liana, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I prepared 2 questions. So before this interview, I listened to the podcast episode that you were on, and I remember hearing that you went through kind of some difficulties in your farm life. I wanted to know if you think that there is more of a need for, I would say, just more advocacy, I would say, for mental health in like farmers in general. And what do you think that would look like?
I think that's an excellent question. And so the short answer is yes. Farming, it is challenging work. I might not look it, but I'm over 40. And I think that approaching something that requires the amount of physicality that farming does and trying to bend it to my will and my physical capabilities has been a challenge. And it can be demoralizing. It can be discouraging sometimes to come out of the field and you feel broken down and it's like, oh God, I'm an old. This is not something that I should be doing. But at the same time, it's the only thing I can see myself doing. But I think that that's a universal experience, no matter what kind of farmer you are. And so I think that that is something that impacts your mental health. I think that, again, community perception of farmers and what our value is, whether we're skilled or not, whether we're smart or not, that can be demoralizing when you encounter it. I thankfully haven't encountered it a whole lot, but it's still out there. And I do think that even if those things weren't issues, just the issue of balance, because there's quite literally always something to do on the farm. Farm will take everything you've given. And so you really kind of have to have hard boundaries around when you're going to work and what you're going to work. And, if it doesn't work out this way, then can we pivot another way? I say that farmers are kind of the masters of the pivot for that reason, because things don't always work out the way that you need them to. And so it is challenging to make a living as a farmer. And that's why a lot of farmers work off farm jobs. And I think that all of those things combine sometimes to weigh on your mind and to make you worry. And so I do think that there does need to be more emphasis on balance, more emphasis on supporting farmers through burnout. I have heard of specific limited programs that connect farmers with resources like childcare or counseling or things like that. I feel like some of those grants were through SARE, which what the acronym stands for fails me, but there's a regional SARE, they're USDA funded, that's SARE, and some SARE grants have funded some of those kind of mental health issues.
Farming in the United States is often romanticized as a life of independence and connection to the land, but the reality for many farmers is one of chronic stress, isolation, and alarming rates of mental health challenges. Studies indicate that farmers are nearly twice as likely to experience depression and anxiety compared to the general population, with suicide rates among farmers significantly higher than national averages. Economic pressures, including fluctuating crop prices, rising input costs, and debt, combined with long hours, physical strain, and unpredictable weather, can create a perfect storm for mental health struggles. Social isolation and stigma around seeking help exacerbate the problem, leaving many farmers to suffer in silence. Recognizing this, programs like the USDA Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education, SARE, aim to ease these pressures by offering grants, workshops, and community networks that help farmers build resilience, both on the land and in their lives. By connecting farmers to practical tools and peer support, SARE highlights that mental health is as vital to farming as the soil itself.
I think for me personally, if someone were to come to me and say, what are the things that I could do to help support your balance and mental health as a farmer? I do think a lot of that would center around the home. A lot of it would center around helping me keep all of the balls in the air. I, am a caretaker. I have an elderly mother with a chronic condition. I've got 4 children that are school age. I think that any efforts to help support my mental health would also have to target and support the health of my home life so that I could focus more on farming, or not so much focus more on farming, worrying less about the impact of farming to the people that I love the most. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. And I had just one more question.
Yes.
So you transferred from 1/3 of an acre to 3 acres. I just kind of wanted to know, what was the most difficult part of that transition, and what do you think was the easiest part?
Honestly, the easiest part, and again, I recognize that I am living kind of a charmed life as a farmer in this regard. I'm very lucky to be in an area that respects its farmers and supports its farmers, and there's lots of farms and lots of agricultural land, and even in my county, the zoning supports farming on land that is not zoned agricultural, which is how I have a farm number for my residents. And so there's a lot of things that support us here. So from that regard, the easiest part was finding the land and signing the lease. My landlord is awesome. She supports anything that I want to do on the land except goats. I'm working on her on that. Like, I would really love to be able to rent goats to clear the back acre that I'm not using. But I did get a grant to put a cover crop on that back acre. So progress. The hardest part, though, was land management. It is a very big difference from growing in an area basically the size of your backyard, a big backyard, to growing on multiple acres bordered by woods, a stream at the back of it that apparently has some kind of endangered American lamprey in it. And so, going through the process to get the conservation plan to protect the land, protect the forest, protect the wildlife and the water, understanding what I would need to do from that perspective on an order of magnitude above a home garden scale, having the equipment to effectively manage the land, building the strategy to manage the land. I think that was something that was challenging. And so, for the folks that I meet that are like, I want to have a 50-acre homestead and I want to do this and I want to do that. And it's like, well, you really need to think about whether you really want to manage those 50 acres. Are you going to mow all that land? Are you gonna rent goats to keep everything chewed down? Are you going to get a conservation plan? Because even though here in America we love the concept of ownership, the land belongs to all of us. That ecosystem on your land impacts the ecosystem on the land next to you and the land next to that. And so I think that, it was a hard mental transition to make and a hard physical transition to make and a financial one. But I think that I am making it, and I feel like I'm able to take what I learned from that transition and help other people think realistically about their capabilities and what the responsibility of managing a piece of land really looks like.
That was Farmer Mac, Mara McCasted of Ad Astra Farms in Maryland, sharing how far she's come since receiving her 4 Farmers grant in 2023, and what's ahead as she continues to expand. We heard how she grew her CSA from 6 families to nearly 30, how she's partnering with other small farmers to bring variety and joy to her customers, and how she's balancing the realities of land management, market challenges, and systemic barriers with creativity, grit, and a whole lot of community support. She also reminded us of the bigger picture, that farming is not just about growing food, but about hope, dignity, and connection. If you'd like to support more farmers like Farmer Mac, visit forfarmersmovement.com and learn how even $1 helps keep hard-working farmers on the land. Thank you to Liana and Shahid for their excellent questions, and to Sonia Dillon and Russell Chapa for making this podcast possible. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people like you discover these important stories. Until next time, remember, every bite on your plate is connected to the bigger world. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and this is One Bite is Everything. I'll see you right here next week.